Hello, everybody. Welcome to this month's webinar for OPSWAT Academy. Today, we're talking about transient cyber assets and removable media. I'm Nate Medeiros, the product owner of technical certifications for OPSWAT Academy, and I am very pleased to have our guest speaker on, Bill Zhao. Bill, I'm going to hand it over to you. Can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself and your experience in the industry?
Thank you, Nate, for having me here. Hi, everyone. My name is Bill Zhao, and I'm an engineering director at OPSWAT, working from the San Francisco office. My industry experience has most been focused on cybersecurity, cybersecurity defense, and I've been working at OPSWAT for 3.5 years now. And before that, I worked in other cybersecurity companies in the Valley, like McAfee and Symantec.
All right, very cool. Well, today's topic, we're talking about transient cyber assets and removable media, things that you're bringing into an organization. So, can you kick this off? Tell us a little bit about what transient cyber assets and removable media are. Let our listeners know who may not be familiar with these terms and how these factor into the larger cybersecurity landscape.
Of course. So, what we call transient cyber assets, short for TCA, is that, everything that's actually not permanently connected to your IT network, to your fixed IT assets, like your workstation servers, and that's not, constantly under, surveillance control by the IT security team or OT security team. And some examples are removable media, like, laptops come in and go, and, diagnostic tools, and, anything that can, travel between one site and another, or from a vendor to a client.
Okay. And
That's
then from a security standpoint, so we're we're looking at transient cyber assets like I am the operator of a power plant, and one of my relays needs to be firmware needs to be updated for the relay controller. I don't own the software for that controller, so I need the vendor to come in and bring their laptop to do whatever work they need to do, right? And maybe that's one scenario, and that would be under the transient cyber asset umbrella, where that's that laptop that's not part of my network. I now have to have some kind of security practice in order to defend myself against, um, you know, malicious material that may be on that laptop, even unbeknownst to that vendor. Right? I'm letting those things in. On the other hand, we're talking, with removable media. I mean, everybody uses USBs. If you want to install Windows on your PC, most people just put it on a USB, install from there. So we have to approach these things with very different um, technologies and very different processes. Uh, the idea of kind of lumping them together as we did and as we did for this webinar is really to talk about what's the impact of bringing something into my network externally that I don't have full control over. So can you give us a brief um, you know cybersecurity perspective as what it is how one would first tackle the problem of what do I do with this vendor's laptop, and then what do I do if the vendor doesn't bring a laptop but brings in a USB?
okay, exactly. Right. So first, why, a vendor actually needs to bring their own devices, either their laptop or USB media, and sometimes it could be SD card as well, right? Because, uh, we usually have a air gap network, right? And they cannot, and we do not accept the emailing in, right? Or like offer us to download from their website. Right?
No
So
external
those are
access. Yeah.
right. Those are specialized equipment. They're not necessarily connected to the internet, and so they need to be serviced by authorized technicians. So they need to bring those software firmware updates, those assets in. And we should trust that vendor has put in the proper cybersecurity control, security policy in, that they are bringing in devices that's pre-scanned, but we also need to verify, right? And it could be during transit, right? It could be intercepted by people, right? So the devices might be left on the coffee table when the technician was going to the Starbucks restroom for like 5 minutes. And so we always need to verify on the customer side, right? Because we have a separate, a different security policy process to follow. Okay, so scanning those devices, scanning for malware is actually very important.
I think that concept is pretty intuitive. I mean, we all know about computer malicious content, or even just access policies. Like you said, leaving a laptop with a policy that lets it stay unlocked for too long can be a dangerous thing to do as well. That's more of an intuitive um, concept for probably a lot of our learners, where we want to have antivirus software. We want to potentially do a compliance check to make sure that these minimum access is enforced. Now let's shift a little bit to removable media threats, because I think that this is kind of has uh, a less clear threat vector that a lot of people don't fully appreciate as well. So I'd like to dive into this a little bit, because it's completely fascinating to anybody that's taken our content to learn about it. We've gotten all kinds of questions relating to this. So a USB, it's not very threatening. Just looking at it, I mean, everyone uses it all the time. But what kind of um, you know actual threats are we subject to by using something so simple?
Okay, so the USB, yes, we get them, from everywhere, right? So you could, have one in your pocket that, in some certain times, the file are blocked by your IT control, and so you can just, stuck in the USB drive and make a, quick file transfer, and you can, get them in trade shows. It could be mailed to you, right, as samples, right, as marketing material. And but these devices could be loaded with malware, and it could even be a target attack. And it's also a source for cross contamination. You can have all kind of IT control, a separation of the network you can have, but the USB media, it's very small, and people tend to overlook them. And it can be a hidden bridge between your segmented network. And so if malware is loaded onto that, it would be the bridge for cross contamination.
Do you have any? Can you give us any examples of significant security breaches in the past that occurred due to removable media threats?
Yeah, I can actually give you two. One is, the first one, that's, a breach through a USB drive, and another one is a more recent one. So the most famous cybersecurity breach that caused real damage is original Stuxnet. Stuxnet was a malware that was created by certain intelligence agencies that we shall not name here, and it was designed to target the Iranian nuclear program. So the story goes that maybe some intelligence secret agent man dropped a USB drive in a parking lot out of Iranian nuclear facility. And some technician found the USB drive. Oh, like a free USB drive. I wonder if it's 16 megabytes or 32 megabytes.
Right.
So the technician brought it into the nuclear facility, plug into his computer, And there were malware on there that utilized multiple zero-day vulnerabilities of the Windows operating system, and was able to contaminate the Siemens industrial control machine, SCADA machine, and it actually caused physical damage and destroyed the centrifuges inside the facility. And so some people may say, did the security or the intelligence agencies foresee that this Stuxnet could actually spread out of that facility and infect the rest of the world? I guess they didn't think that would happen, because this would be going into a air-gapped facility, right? So once the damage is done, it will be contaminated. It will be contained, but that's not what happened. The Stuxnet actually spread to worldwide, and I think our infrastructure also get affected by this malware, and this is another example of cross-contamination. So,
right, and this all occurred just from the operator plugging it into the device. They didn't run any suspicious programs. There's just zero-day vulnerabilities that allowed that USB to execute its payload just from the act of plugging it into one of the central machines, and that was enough.
Right, it was very straightforward. A more recent example would be the Triton malware, and that was discovered in Saudi Arabia, and it was, it can be, viewed as many of those copycat malware. It follows the same lineage as the Stuxnet, and it was designed to shut down the security measures of the industrial control program. And so this malware actually could result in human life, right? Loss of human life, yet if it was allowed to spread.
Anything that targets critical infrastructure, especially a nuclear facility or something that can cause a meltdown, or even water treatment plants. There's so many things that we rely on that are targeted through this way. So that's absolutely an excellent point. We have a question from we have a question from somebody in the audience. Has Windows patched the ability for USBs to execute its payload just from plugging it in?
So there are security policies you can control, the GPU policies, that it will not, do the auto run. Yes, I mean, if you put the right control in GPU, you can prevent auto run, but that does not prevent user action. And you could also copy the files, right, to the local file system, and or it does not actually always involve execution of a real executable, right? So if you have active content in a document, right, you can have scripts in PDF or in a Word document or Excel spreadsheet, right? So those would also have the ability to execute code if you would be able to escape the document if it's designed to take advantage of some zero-day vulnerability. And so the no execute security policy might not be able to prevent you from all kinds of threats.
Right, and is that enabled by default for most PCs, or is that something like a IT administrator needs to go in and configure themselves to make sure that USB devices don't auto execute?
So if your computer is joined on a domain, I believe the vast majority, if not everyone, organization would actually have that policy enabled. A sensible
pretty standard
policy should, yeah.
Okay. That's incredibly fascinating. I mean, even if you think of having that mistakenly enabled, it always comes down to user action at some point. Even if it is an auto running script, you can think of that action, that user mistake, if you will. We often think of it as opening some kind of email link or running a file that we really shouldn't have run. Um, but even the physical act of the person, inserting that removable media into that device, if the group policy was misfigured, what have you, that's still that
Right.
user action. So has there been um, a widespread adoption um, of handling of removable media, especially for maybe government facilities or critical infrastructure, just from the human level? That kind of training, that kind of perspective. Has there been a big shift after these attacks, or is it still a relatively, um, quiet threat, I suppose?
So they are, education campaigns, right? And there's awareness created because of the Stuxnet and the Triton attack. So I believe at least in the critical infrastructure domain, there are industrial standards that's being proposed to better mitigate the risk. And through talking to our customers, and a lot of organizations have a user education campaign, and they're also looking for a a security solution, right, to enforce the processes and
Yeah,
to
let's
boost the
talk a little
security.
bit. Let's talk a little bit about that. So, from a big picture, what are what strategies are organizations adopting to actually secure their assets from threats like this? From you mentioned education campaigns and then solutions, but what does that mean? What's the practice of creating some kind of process that's going to protect my my air gap network from a USB with a malicious hook that automatically runs a payload of malware?
So yes, a, um, a a security program, right, start with the cybersecurity awareness. Right? So the employees, right, should be at least aware the threat of a USB media and other forms of removable media. Right?
Mhm.
Just like there's a lot of training and in awareness in phishing attacks through emails,
Right.
and the removable media might be overlooked. So the training needs to be there first, and then there should be some physical control, right? So people would know like they should not bring company laptops, right? And if it's a vendor, right, a supplier, they bring their laptop. Usually there will be someone to actually examine that and have that asset registered, right? So at least you can keep track of that. And but the USB media might be overlooked, right? It
Right.
could, nowadays USB media can be very small, and if you're talking about micro or mini or micro SD card, right? So it's tiny, right? Smaller than your pinky fingernail,
Right.
and
Yeah.
then we need to actually have a control, right? So all of the modern laptops, computers, or even some of the control devices, right? So they have USB ports, and some of them have media ports, right? So and those ports are not glued off, right? So you can plug any kind of device into that, right?
Right.
So yeah, it's if you need to patch network, or you need to connect to the network, at least you maybe it has security control, it has VLAN control, right? If it's Wi-Fi, you need a password, right? Somebody need to give it to you, right? But a media, right, if you pop something in, right, people might not be even aware of that, right? So you could, you need to worry about well-intentioned employees, well-intentioned supplier, right, contractors. You also need to worry about like, malicious insiders, right? So it's that, because the remote media can be very sneaky, right? So that added a challenge in the security control part of this, right? So you cannot always have, physical control, and you can not, catch all, misbehavior through education. So, a software-based solution, would, always be necessary in this scenario.
How do we incorporate a software solution to such what's a seemingly physical process, though? Right, I'm physically carrying in a USB from point A to point B. How do I get software to interact with that kind of process?
So I think there are actually three types of software that can help in this, right? So one is that you have at the intake phase, right? So you're bringing a laptop in, or you're bringing a USB media in, right? Right? So there's software that can scan those devices to make sure, there's no malware, right? And the content passed the security control of your company, right? Sometimes even if there's no malware signature match, right, you might still have 0-day threat, right? So like, for example, if I bring in a PDF file, right, or maybe a spreadsheet, right, to present, to the plan manager of the latest offering I have, right? So I think, just the presentation itself is not threatening, but there might be scripts hidden in the presentation, right? Which is not necessary, right? So when you're presenting something, no actually script needs to run, right? So you can think about something that maybe remove the active content, right? Only allow the static content to come in. So that is in the entry stage. Right? So that's the software that should be considered for your security process and enforcement. The other one would be the transfer phase. Right? So you might have a policy that you need to accept vendor provided executable software and everything subject to scan, right? But you might not want want the vendor to bring in with their media, like the USB media they brought in,
No
or other
media allowed in
laptop.
my network. Just say
Right, right,
nothing's
right,
allowed in. Okay, yeah.
right. You can have a file transfer control, right? So to transfer the allowed, scanned, clean files in, right? It could be copied to your media, right? That's branded, right? That's recognizable, right? And
Like
it could be
I own a USB as a company operator. I say if you want to give me a file, you put it in through my upload portal. I go through my security solution software and then I download it onto my media if I have to have one.
right, exactly, right. Or like a file vault type, right? So transfer from the outside network into the internal network, right? And you can even actually have one additional scan that can be performed, right, inside your network. Okay, so that's the transfer. Right? The third type of control you can put in is at the point of use. So um, like if you have a SCADA machine or HMI device, right? Those are typically not managed by your IT network, right? They're not joined as a domain device.
Right.
And so, the USB, disable, USB auto-run feature, right? That was actually part of the GP policy, right? Might not took effect over there, right? Maybe it's not applicable, right? And you can have all your controls like file transfer, point of entry, right? Control there, right? But I could always have a USB drive in my back pocket, right? And I forgot to scan, right? And in the haste of things, maybe I just whipped out the wrong USB drive unbeknownst to me, right? I plug into the device, right?
Oops, I
And
used my
whatever,
malicious one.
right? Yes, I probably have some plausible deniability, but regardless, right? So if you don't have some control at the point of use, right, and that would relegate all the previous controls that are useless.
Right.
So you need to consider maybe have a hardware control or software control on those devices inside the air gap network as well, and to truly have an end-to-end security control for in defense of any kind of attacks that can be launched from removed media.
Okay. I mean, that's great. Three ways to do that. I'm really interested in diving into actually all three of these just to visualize. Talk a little bit about how this would actually be executed. Let's jump back to the first scenario that you talked about with the point of entry, and you mentioned either scanning a laptop or scanning a USB. Let's walk through what this actually would look like in the real world. So if I have a laptop, I provide it to some security technician or operator at some point when I enter the facility before I can bring my laptop any further, and I'm using some kind of software to scan the hard drive of that laptop. Is that correct?
Yes. So we OPSWAT does have an offering, and that actually can scan your laptop. So the way it works is that we have a product called Medeiros Drive, and it would it can plug into your laptop while it's powered off, and you can boot up the laptop and change the boot order and to boot from USB drive. And we would launch our product inside this embedded environment, and we employ 5 malware engines and our CDR engine that will both scan for malware and also potentially to disarm active content that would go into the network. And so this is actually much more powerful than the single vendor virus that was
Right.
active inside the laptop. And it also has a capability to scan for rootkit, right, the boot sector. And
Because you're booting right from the motherboard into the USB, so it's actually able to check that information as well, rather
right,
than just an
exactly,
OS level scan.
right. The a built-in antivirus software typically only get launched after your operating system is fully booted. Okay, if something were to happen before the loading of the Windows operating system, right? The built-in software running inside Windows will
Hmm.
have trouble, to detect threats before it is launched.
Okay, that's fascinating. So that's one way that we can address devices, transient cyber assets. Now, what about removable media? Right? You mentioned there's a solution to plug in a USB that has its own environment that you scan, but you're not going to plug a USB into another USB. So what do we do in those cases when we have, something like a USB that we need to bring in and we want to do that scan at the point of entry? What do we typically do?
So typically, you should in, install a kiosk-like virus scanning station, and
Like a physical
so
machine kiosk.
right,
Okay.
and some customers, they would actually have a laptop, right, a spare laptop, right,
Right.
and that runs a antivirus software on that, and if you have USB media brought into the network, right, it just plug into the a system and scan and auto scan for virus. So there are a lot of flaws in this approach. Right? So first, there's only one vendor, right? So a lot of threats are discovered by the security vendors
Mhm.
that's co-located with the original author of those malware. Right? So typically we see that if a malware is actually developed in South America, right? South America, malware vendor would detect that first, right?
Right.
And if it's in Asia, right, Asian security company would discover that, first. So the threat, regional, and the intelligence, the regional as well. Like the first one, I noticed those kind of threats. The first one would actually analyze them, right? Get a
Right.
sample of those things, right? So if you have a
'Cause-
single vendor, right, you actually have holes in your coverage.
Because it matters. It matters the time it takes for that malware to be discovered, for the vendor to create a signature definition for that malware, and then to update their own, customer base of, using their product anyway. And that time is going to be different for each vendor because it's a process for all of them.
Right, right. So your solution needs to be multi-vendor, right? First, right, and also the threat intelligence, right? So the signature database needs to be updated continuously,
Right.
and also this scanning station, right, needs to be segmented, right, from your IT network, right. It needs to have access to internet to
Right.
download
Yeah.
all the signature updates.
It needs to be outside of that air gap because it needs to have that access to get those definitions as quickly as possible to be as effective as possible. So it can't be inside of. That's why you mentioned point of entry, right? And we're still
Right,
technically on the outside of that.
right.
Right.
So other considerations are, beyond just the malware scan, right. You need to also consider like mitigation for archive content, right? And you need to think about the threat intelligence, your file reputation. So typically, the and also supply chain risk, right? So you want to verify that a software executable firmware updates are coming from the reputable vendor, right? And that the chain of custody is verified as well. And so it will be very hard for customer to come up with their own solution, and that would meet regulation compliance, and also your homegrown solution would lack traceability, right, reporting, and those aspects as well. So a a solution that is
Country of
certified,
origin. Yeah.
right? Yes, and
Got it.
yeah, and OPSWAT does actually have such a industry leading solution, and that actually meet all those requirements that we listed above.
Great. So that's entry. And then we have a question here that I'm going to save for a moment, or maybe we can jump to it. I was going to talk about the in trans and what that would look like, but the question is actually a really good segue to the third point you mentioned about security at the point inside. The question that we have from the audience is, if I have a kiosk scanner outside, how can I verify that the USB was scanned when I'm inside the network? Now, this question, there's one answer that we could probably all think of. If you have a security guard watching to make sure the USB is scanned, they can, they can make sure that that person has the same USB as they go through the process. But let's talk a little bit about, like you mentioned before, hardware and software to be able to actually enforce that on the internal levels of of my secure network. So what would I do if I'm an IT administrator and I want to say I want to make sure that that USB any USB that gets plugged into this computer was verified to be scanned. What are my options?
Right. Just like, physical security, right? So if you check into a concert, right, or, a theme park, right? So they check your ticket, they give
Mhm.
you a wristband, right? Or they, put a stamp, right, on your hand, right? So, if you have your USB media scanned, right, and we do give you a stamp of approval that is verifiable true, right? So that is what we typically call a manifest, right? So a manifest is a signed list of all the files that's clean, right?
Okay.
So you, after you successfully scanned on a kiosk, on the media, they will be affixed with a manifest that can be verified later, right? And then you bring the media to the point of use, and there should be either software or hardware control that can verify that every file that's on the media is also listed in the manifest. And only then would those files to be allowed access.
So this
And
software on the endpoint needs to be able to block all the USBs from accessing the device it's installed on, unless that stamp of approval, that manifest says, "Hey, I came from a scan. I'm good to go. You can use me." That software actually
yeah,
controls those USB ports. Now, what about
exactly.
what about you mentioned before maybe a SCADA controller? I might not be able to install that kind of software. So you mentioned hardware controller. I mean, what does that look like? How would I implement a hardware solution to actually be able to enforce this?
Right. So there are, devices, that either it's not possible to install third-party software on. Maybe, it's regulation or the vendor, prohibit that. It could be a warranty issue, right? So in these cases, the software solution would not work. And in this case, customers should look for a hardware-based solution. And OPSWAT has a product called the Media Firewall. So it's a hardware device that on one end, you can plug media into it. It could be USB, it could be SD card, it could be a compact flash.
Hmm.
And on the other end, it's connected to a USB port. Um, of the host computer. It could be the SCADA machine or HMI device. And the hardware, when powered on, it will actually validate every file that is on the manifest, and then it will allow the USB media to be accessed in a pass-through mode. So it is as if that when all pass, one check are passed,
Hmm.
and the media will appear as if it's directly attached to the host.
Okay, so that external device is going to be handling the check to make sure that that USB got the stamp of approval from the scanning station that happened back at the point of entry. And with that, I can use it with all my
Right,
systems that have USB ports, even if I can't install software necessarily on them.
right,
Okay, great. And yes, I hope that that answers the question about how to enforce this. So, before we move on, I do want to go back. I don't want to skip over your second point completely. I want to go back a little bit with data in transit and being scanned. I mean, to me, this sounds inherently like I already have more control as an IT administrator. If I have an environment where maybe it's physically difficult to get to, or there's other kinds of controls around that environment where um, people are maybe accessing those resources locally, or those human machine interfaces within the network don't have USB ports on them, or whatever it is. And I can say the only way to get files into this network is on a secure file server within the network. And the only way to get those files to that secure file server is through one way, whether it's a data diode or just a single connection allowed through the firewall, however that's configured. To me, inherently, that means I already have more control of the situation. So, the implication here is that we would scan those files when they're being uploaded from the external location, uh, and then being transferred over to that internal secure network.
Right. So in the facility, if a facility is air gapped, that means there's something worthy of protection, right? More than some other things.
The internet's pretty
And
useful, so typically, yeah, people will tend that way unless they have to.
right. So with heightened security needs, they imply that the value of the attack, right? So the more protective of something, the more motivated attacker, right, would be.
Right.
So so we need to be in some situations, I think a little bit paranoid would help. And in those extreme situations, you want maximum security that's available in the most recent technology advancement. So in those cases, you can go out. Right? So not only you can actually have point of entry control,
Mhm.
right? You can do the multi-scan, you can disarm any kind of potential zero-day threat, right? You can verify the whole supply chain, and then you can allow the files to be uploaded to the air-gapped network. During that process, you also want to make sure that nothing comes out of the air-gapped network as well, right? So in this case, you can actually have a secure gateway that only goes one way or another with defined policy, right? So yes, you can use a data diode type of device to make sure that the protocol itself does not interact with with the file content at all.
Right.
And
And for
once the
for our
files,
audience, for our audience, really quickly, just for the data diode, for those that aren't familiar with it, just a one sentence description. It's a hardware device that has a one-way connection from point A to point B. So if I have my internal network, my data diode is going to be sending data in only. It's not going to let data back out. They're done in different ways. The most traditional one is to use optics because light's only going in one direction so that the data is only transferred this way. But there's also ways to do it by mirroring memory and
right,
having more of a technological solution to that. That's what that is. So anyway, sorry for the
right.
interruption, Bill. Go ahead and continue.
Yeah, that helps. That actually is another application of the principle of separation of control, right? So if you have the light going one way, that means that even if you actually have the most clever tricks that you can play in the content that can interact with the protocol, right? It's just physically not possible,
Right.
right, to affect that transmission. Okay. So once the files are uploaded internally, right, and it can be put into a secure vault, and maybe you can even actually have a cooling off period, right? You can configure this security vault to continuously scan the files that's uploaded,
Before they're
and
accessible.
right,
And that
because
that goes back to the definition updates then, right?
yeah, like a zero-day attack, right? Typically occur, right? And maybe there's a window, right? A zero-day attack occurred, and zero-day attack cannot be ever eliminated, so they would always happen. Okay.
Right.
The good thing about zero-day attack is, once attack is launched, it will be detected, right? And the more people would know about it. And the security companies would update their detection engine to reflect that, okay? So if you are super paranoid, you can actually take in files and put in a vault, right? And then regularly scan that for days. And during that time, right, your security tools will get updates. Okay, so it's a cooling off period, right?
Right.
And then after it's been sitting there for a number of days or weeks, depending on your security policy,
Right.
and then you can deem that to be safe to use. Yeah.
Because if there
So
was some kind of attack, it would have happened elsewhere by now. The definitions would have known about it, and you would have seen it in
right,
your internal scan.
right,
Okay. So there's so many different ways that we can physically enforce rules to either prevent USBs from going into our facilities or protecting those endpoints that we're plugging them into. So things like those events that you talked about in the past, there are ways to secure against Stuxnet or Triton or any threats that have happened with USBs. It's just a matter of a mix of physical policy on what people can and cannot do with the zero trust technologies and using them in proper ways.
right, right. Have the proper user education, have a well-designed program, and have the resources, software and hardware, to enforce the process, the policy,
Hmm.
and keep monitoring it. And yes, that is a recipe
So
for mitigating attacks.
when we're dealing with secure environments, oftentimes the transient assets are going to be encrypted, like BitLocker for Windows, or for example. But even removable media, they have encrypted USB drives that have a keypad right on them that you need to physically unlock before you can access the content. If there's something that's important to that internal network and I need to scan it, I know how much of a wrench does encrypted media and encrypted hard drives play into this role of processes. I mean, we need to find ways to be able to still scan them.
Yes. So the encrypted media is a double-edged sword, right? So in one way, it boosts the security, right? So a hardware or software-based encrypted USB drive, it's not as susceptible from a drive-by attack, right? So if you check your luggage, right, and at the gate, right, because it's too bulky, and it has USB drive in it, right? So it so you would lose control for hours, right? So
Mhm.
you might not know what happened to it. But if it's encrypted, right, it's going to be harder for third party to load malware onto that. If they cannot read from the device, it's harder for them to write to it as well, right? So that's one mitigating factor for encrypted media. On the other hand, right, so you need to make sure you would be able to scan those devices, right? So if you're scanning a solution, right, look at it, say, oh, I cannot read it, okay, so I let it go, right? That's going to be a mistake. Yeah.
Right.
So your
Yeah.
solution needs to be able to decrypt and scan everything.
Got it. And I think that's a really good segue into the last item I want to leave you with, where I always let my guests talk a few minutes about the solutions that they're working on here at OPSWAT. And maybe you could talk a little bit about how we handle those kind of challenges like encryption and just other things that you'd like to share with the cool things that you're working on here.
Okay, absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity. So in OPSWAT, I'm working on a number of products that's relevant to this sector. So one of them is what we call MetaDefender kiosk. So it is a hardware appliance, and it's also available in a software form that you can install on your own infrastructure. And the appliance, what it does, it can take in all kinds of removed media, right? Be it like USB media, USB-A, USB-C. It could be, CD, DVD, disk, It could be compact flash, SD card, or even floppy drive. And so we scan all kinds of media for malware. We have a multi-scan engine. You can have like 8 engine, 12 engine, 20 engines. It can be like 30 plus engines. And we can disarm active content. We can check the file reputation. We can check vulnerabilities, and not necessarily malware. And we can check the software country of origin if you actually have policies to prohibit software from any particular country of origin. And we can put a media manifest on the media after successful scan, and we can copy your file content into another newly wiped media, and we can copy the files to a file vault or any other network file destination, and it has integration with our own data dial solution. It also integrates with third-party data dial solution that for file upload into air-gap network, and that is the point of entry at a point of use. We also have software-based media validation agent, where we only allow media that's being scanned. And if you cannot install software, we have what we call OPSWAT media firewall that will enforce the media manifest, enforcing the scan, and that is compatible with any kind of device that has USB connection. Right? You can actually have a a device that that's running a proprietary operating system, but as long as support USB, you plug in one end to it, the other end is any kind of media device, and we would be able to do the be the bridge, and we will be the secure bridge enforcement on the point of use to link everything together, point of entry, the data in motion, and point of use.
Very cool. And then about that point of entry, you mentioned that this is the kiosk solution where you plug in the USB. What's protecting it from those very same threats we're safeguarding our internal assets for? So if I have a hook on a USB file and I'm trying to deliver a malicious payload, what kind of defenses are in place to protect against that?
Okay, so the kiosk system we have, it comes into contact with all kinds of malware regularly by design. So the way we preventing the kiosk itself from infected by malware viruses is that we never actually execute anything from the media, right? So we only read them as binary content, and we process them in an isolated environment, and we don't even copy the files around unless it's absolutely necessary for individual file, right? So we read from the device, and we do not actually make a temporary copy of it, and so that would limit the spread of the file. And after we done scanning, we'll clean up the environment, and the system, the software system we run on is also hardened. So we have control in there that will prevent any kind of unauthorized modification of the system. So those are the some of the security measures and design considerations we protect us from the malware that we have to interact with.
Great. And then what about the encryption topic that we mentioned before?
So we are compatible. We have built-in support and compatibility with a number of encrypted media, It can be software encryption like Microsoft BitLocker. It could be, hardware-based from various vendors. And so when you plug in a encrypted USB media, we would ask you for credentials, right? It could be
The
just
key
a
for the,
password, key, and we would actually then decrypt the device for you, and then proceed with the scanning.
then business as usual. All right. Well, thank you so much, Bill. It was great to have you on. That was a lot of really cool concepts and conversation around transient cyber assets and removable media. To anybody in the audience that we didn't get to answer your questions, I apologize. We'll follow up via email. Make sure that you get your questions answered. And thank you so much for joining. And we'll see you on the next one. All right. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.